back here on the Cover 3 podcast live on CBS Sports Network. One of the things we like to do every single Tuesday here at this platform is take you inside some of the biggest games in the Big Ten each week. And we do have a game between two of the top 10 teams in offensive yards per play, between two of the top 3 teams in yards per play allowed, between two of the top 3 teams, again, in the country in scoring margin. Both offenses and defenses are balanced against the run and the pass. Both teams are ranked in the top 5 of the AP poll. Good gravy. I did not think we'd be talking about Indiana and Ohio State like this, but here we are. It is a celebration of everything that Indiana has done to get here. It is an acknowledgement that Ohio State, as a one-loss team, and that one loss coming by 1 point to the number 1 team in the country, has done almost everything we could have expected of the Buckeyes. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Danny, when we start to peel this apart, what are some of your burning questions, your matchup points where you think the game will be decided?
I think the one most obvious point is, how does Indiana stack up physically versus Ohio State? You know, going back and look at some of their, marquee players. Mikael Kamara, somebody we've raved about here, leads the Big Ten in sacks and tackles for losses. He's listed at 6'1", 265. Like, that's good size, but that's not 6'4", 275. It's a little bit on the smaller side. The middle linebacker, Jalen Walker, 6'1", 218. How do they stack up against this rushing attack for Ohio State with those bigger backs coming at you? That, to me, is probably primarily the one thing that I want to see is, how does Indiana's defensive front stack up against Ohio State's run game? I know their offensive line has been banged up and they've retooled it and they've moved it around, but how do they stop Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, and Will Howard? That, to me, will determine the success of the game. Can they get off the field versus that, those physical guys that will have an advantage size-wise over this Indiana defense?
Danny, I'm right there with you. I'm going to go to the other side of the ball, though. I'm curious to see, how well does Indiana cover Ohio State? If you think about who Indiana has played so far, FIU, Western Illinois, UCLA, Charlotte, Maryland, which actually did have success throwing the ball on them, despite it was rainy and really, really windy that day. And ultimately, Indiana prevailed because they got after the quarterback pretty well with their defensive line. But Maryland had a lot of guys open against Indiana. If you guys go back and watch that ball game, Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State, and Michigan. So suffice to say, they have not really faced a murderer's row of passing attacks so far. And Ohio State has real dudes, right? Egbuka, obviously Jeremiah, and then in recent weeks, we've seen the emergence more of Tate and Brandon Ennis as sort of those third and fourth weapons for the Buckeyes. So I am very curious if Indiana can hold up in coverage.
Is there, because there's so many toys that Ohio State has, and because Chip Kelly is, renowned offensive mind, and Ryan Day, certainly with his own impressive track record, guiding an offense, I sometimes think, watching Ohio State, that I wish the race car did more cool tricks. I wish that they could go faster, do more things, that on paper, a guy playing Madden would not run the offense in the way they run it. But is that hubris? Is that protecting yourself against mistakes? Because there's a path that I could see here where Ohio State doesn't utilize all those wide receivers. They want to come out, they want to establish the run, they hope to wear you down, avoid the mistakes. And how do you see Ohio State approaching it from their coach's room, trying to put together the game plan to beat Indiana? Because I don't know if we've seen Will Howard come out and chuck the ball all over the yard the way that CJ Stroud would if he necessarily had this same set of wide receivers to be able to play with. So what's the mentality there in terms of how aggressive Ohio State could or should be in this spot?
Chip, it's a fascinating question, because if you're Ohio State, if you asked them 3 to 4 weeks ago, they'd probably say, all right, we need to pound the rock, probably need to run Will Howard here because we're now down our first and second left tackle. And they had to move Donovan Jackson, a guard, to left tackle. Yeah. And as a recruiting guy, I actually saw him play tackle a pretty good bit at a lot of these camps. I guess in an emergency that could work. And to me, Jackson has played better than I thought he would play at this level. So Ohio State's coaching staff is going to have to ask themselves a question, how good do you think this guy can hold up against some real pass rushers? Because Indiana, as Danny pointed out, does have some. Or do you want to kind of lean on him just to be a great run blocker, as he's always been, run Will Howard more But I do think I would try to test Indiana's secondary. I mean, Maryland had guys open against them pretty often, and nobody else they've faced except for maybe Washington has something even like resembling a competent passing attack at this point. So I'd see if they can cover Jeremiah Nagbuka.
Yeah, I mean, this is, as much as, I've been a captain for Indiana, like cheering them on, saying they deserve the respect, but all these questions are warranted. They will not have faced a passing attack like this one with the type of weapons that they come. Another size, mismatch that I was looking at, D'Angelo Pons, the corner for Indiana, is 5'9". How does he stack up against a beast of a receiver in Jeremiah Smith? Then they have to help him over the top with the safety. That makes it trickier for that safety to get down and help in run support. So all of these questions are ones that I'm sure Kirk Cignetti is wondering too and hoping you're up to the challenge. But there are going to be some clear advantages that Ohio State has. But if you're Ohio State, you've had these all season long against some teams. Even against Nebraska, you had a lot of them, didn't play your best, and all of a sudden you're trailing in the second half, looking up the scoreboard and needing a big Will Howard throw to come back. So I think this will be a good test for both of these teams, and clearly Ohio State has a lot of advantages, but this will be by far the best, most talented team that Indiana has faced. I will say this. We said that several times throughout this season, like Indiana's had to face adversity, whether it was being without their starter, Curtis Rourke, whether it was against Nebraska, whether it was on the road against Michigan State. They have passed every test so far, even Michigan. Now, that one I would say they didn't pass with an A+. It was probably a C, but they passed the test and won the game when they needed to, when it was crunch time. They were able to get out with a win.
Okay, so let's go right back to Curtis Rourke, because if you're going to look at who has the experience, who's got the juice, somebody who you think would be able to handle this hostile environment and not crumble against a terrific defense loaded up with future NFL draft picks, Danny, what's the outlook for Curtis Rourke? What gives you confidence, if you're an Indiana fan, that he's ready to lead you potentially to one of the biggest wins in program history?
So I had a text ready for the Cover 3 group chat during the Michigan game about Curtis Rourke, because I was watching him, and you guys know, if you listen to the show, I always talk about the eyes. Like, how does a quarterback's eyes look? And for the first time this season, I thought he looked a little bit shaken, and I was about to hit send, and then he stepped up and made like a big third down conversion. Like, so he's been there and he's done it. I'll say if you're an Indiana fan, you probably have one of the more underrated receiving cores in the country. That's one thing that jumps out to me with guys like Elijah Surratt, who did drop a couple against Michigan very uncharacteristically. Omar Cooper, Miles Price, they've got some weapons and they like to stretch the field vertically, which we've talked a lot about Ohio State. That's been their vulnerability on the outside, is some of these big plays down the field. And Curtis Rourke, as good as he's been, just overall completion percentage-wise, he's completing 51% of his passes that travel 20 yards or more down the field. So the big play capability is there. That's where, if this becomes a game where you got to go toe-to-toe and your defense can't get off the field, I think he'll get rid of the ball quickly. I think they'll try to protect him with moving him a little bit outside the pocket. And if he can do that, he's got weapons to exploit. So I would expect them to spread the field, try to push the ball vertically down the field, take some shots against Ohio State. Because I don't envision a scenario, as good as their run game has been, I do think it'll be challenging for them to just line up with Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton and just, run the ball, up and down the field against Ohio State's defense. I think they'll need a big game from Curtis Rourke.
One thing that I'm looking for with that Ohio State defense is whether you come out and you try to just squeeze the life out of Indiana. If you are going to come out here and be able to apply pressure, create third and long scenarios, get stops on third and long, get that crowd in the horseshoe rocking and rolling. I know those Ohio State fans, I hear y'all out there. You wish that you were able to have one of these games under the lights, deep into the night. But this is the kind of game that you want to be able to show why Ohio State is one of the top teams in the country. And so for a Buckeyes defense that we know is loaded up to be able to stop the run, can Ohio State stop the run on first and second down? Can Ohio State force some 3-and-outs early in this game? Because then you kind of put yourself in that situation to have the juice, to look like a championship contender. We talked about that with Texas in recent weeks, where it's like, man, I really would like to see this team live up to what your mind's eye imagines of a top 3 team in the entire country. for everything that's there for Indiana, I think there's also an opportunity for Ohio State to walk out of this game and be like, remember why we were that team coming into the year, the rock stars, everybody that came back, everybody we got from the portal. I'm very curious to see, because this is the kind of stage where Ohio State would be able to make quite a statement in terms of their contention for the national championship and so much more. Bud, do you think that Indiana will be able to run the ball against this Ohio State defense?
Not a lot, no. I do think they're going to be able to pass the ball. I like their chance against Ohio State a lot more than I like some of these teams that try to play bully ball against Ohio State, and that's just probably not going to work because Ohio State gets bigger, faster, stronger guys than you do. But I think the timing aspect of what they do with Rourke and Cooper and Surratt and all those dudes, I think that's something that's on them. They own that, right? And so I think you're going to be able to do that some against Ohio State. Now, if they're able to do that a lot, then I think you open up the aspect of the run game, which has been pretty good for them. But I don't know. This is a fairly big step up in class for them to be able to push Ohio State around with the run game.
All right, best bets are going to be coming on Thursday, obviously, with our locked show. But if you were to say a lean, one side that's got your attention, we're looking at, Ohio State around 13.5-point favorites, over under around 51.5. Bud, what kind of game, what kind of outcome do you think we might be in store for?
I feel like the game is lined pretty efficiently, which is a boring answer. But if I had to just force something, I think I would look to under. Because I do think that Ohio State's defense is likely to have some answers for Indiana ultimately over the course of 60 minutes. And I really don't think Ohio State needs style points, right? Just get the dub, get the next week. So if you think Ohio State wins, I think you probably like under.
I think the line is really tight. I've gone back and forth, making sure I don't get caught up with my heart wanting the underdog story of Indiana to go into the shoe. Like, if this game was in Bloomington, I think I'd have a better take on it, feeling like they potentially could do it. I do wonder what it's going to be like going into a hostile environment. Can they keep it close? Which is one of the things I did want to hit on, because we've already going into this game, Indiana has this bar that has been set just for them. They're the only team in the country that we talk about this way. Like, Tennessee just played Georgia. It didn't look great. Second half, the game got away from them. And yet no one is talking about Tennessee now out of the playoff mix because of the final score versus Georgia. That's the bar that's been set, though, for Indiana. Every critic out there has said that. I don't think it's fair, but I do think it'll probably be right around that number. And if it is that enough? Is it a backdoor cover where they score a touchdown late to get it around that 14-point margin? Or, is it one where they're tight and then Ohio State scores late to pull away? All of those things matter, I think, unfortunately, for Indiana. It's not fair, but I think it's the reality that Indiana needs to present well on a national stage to preserve their chances for the college football playoff.
Which is why they're going to play 60 minutes of football, smoke them through the filter, Indiana fourth quarter plus 2.5. I mean, come on. You're going to give me the best fourth quarter team in America, and you're going to give me points to where 7-7 on the scoreboard in the fourth quarter is a winner? Let's go. We're back on that train. All right. No, listen, will that be a lock? Probably. Will I have more on this game? Definitely, because it's the end of the season. We're letting it fly. Come tune in Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time for all of our locks. Well, coming up on the other side, we turn our attention to Penn State and Minnesota, including a player to watch and a big game breakdown next.